You know when you switch the language on an app and everything just works? It feels so seamless. Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on that magic and look at what it really takes to make a piece of global software feel like it was made just for you.
So let's be honest. Most of us probably think, how hard can it be? You just take the English words, run them through a translation tool, and you're done, right? File becomes, well, whatever the word for file is. Simple.
Yeah, no, turns out that's not even close to the whole story. The real process is this deep, complex, and honestly kind of fascinating puzzle of language, law, and straight-up computer code. To really get this, we're going to follow a real-world example, an accounting program that's being adapted for the Italian market. This isn't theoretical. We're going to see the actual nitty-gritty work that localizers have to do every single day. Okay, so the first layer we hit isn't just about translating words. It's about all these unwritten rules for how professionals talk. You get these wrong, and the software isn't just awkward, it's basically unusable. And look at this. It's a perfect example. A literal translation of debtors would be debitore, but in Italian accounting, that's not the term they use. They say clienti, which means customers. You're not just translating a word, you have to translate an entire professional concept. And it gets even more granular than that. In many style guides for Italian software, any button you can click on has to have its name inside square brackets. It's a tiny detail, but it creates this really clear, consistent visual language for the person using it. And it's the same deal for menu paths. They need to be wrapped in single quotes, and you have to use that exact arrow symbol. This isn't just a style suggestion, it's a mandatory format. It's all about making instructions perfectly clear every single time. So what this all means is that the localizer has to be a technical editor too. They have to know that an ampersand in front of a word isn't just a symbol. It creates a keyboard shortcut, and that something like %s is a piece of code that will break the whole program if you try to translate it. But okay, that's just the language stuff. It gets so much deeper. Now we're moving from linguistic rules to the full force of national law. And this, right here, is where things get really complicated. For example, in Italy, you can't just print an invoice and mail it. The law requires something called fatturazione elettronica. This means the software has to be able to create a very specific kind of XML file and send it straight to a government system. The stakes are no longer about clarity. They're about legal compliance. And that means these legal terms, they aren't just words to translate anymore. They're actual software features. The program can't just say IVA, their term for VAT. It has to calculate it correctly. It absolutely needs a field for the codice fiscale, the tax ID, and it needs special functions to handle things like withholding taxes. Think about something as standard as a balance sheet. Well, in Italy, the civil code literally dictates the exact format, right down to these mandatory sections labeled ABC and so on. The software can't just show you the numbers. It has to present them in a legally required structure. So we've covered language and we've covered law. Now we're going to the deepest layer of all, the code itself. This is where localization stops being a coat of paint on the surface and starts changing the software's actual DNA. This is what that process really looks like. Yeah, it starts with translating the labels you see on the screen. But then the real heavy lifting begins. You have to completely rebuild the chart of accounts, configure all those complex new tax codes, and then redesign every single report to make sure it's legally compliant. I love this. This is an actual instruction from a language source file. And it's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? The very first rule of translation is do not translate. It just perfectly shows that these language files aren't just lists of words. They're sensitive, critical parts of the program's machinery. And here's a fantastic example of how that text and code get all tangled up. The translator has to write a sentence around this weird-looking placeholder, knowing that the software is going to dynamically jam the product's name in there later, so you have to translate the sentence while carefully protecting the piece of code that's sitting right in the middle of it. So after all that deep structural work, rewriting language, embedding entire legal codes, editing the source code, you'd think you'd be done. But you're not. Now comes one of the most critical stages of all, the final quality assurance check. And this final QA check is absolutely meticulous. They're checking everything. Does the translated text actually fit inside the buttons on the screen? Is the word cliente used for customer everywhere, or did debitore slip in somewhere? One tiny mistake can make the software look unprofessional, or even worse, create a massive legal problem. So after all of this, the conceptual translation, the deep dive into national law, the changes to the code itself, what do you think is the single biggest, most common enemy that can bring all this hard work crashing down?
Believe it or not, it's a button that's too small. It sounds like a punchline, but it's a huge real-world problem. The English word save is 4 letters. Its Italian equivalent might be 12. And if that longer word doesn't fit in the button the designer made, the entire user interface breaks. It's the perfect summary of this whole challenge. It's a delicate dance between language, design, and technology. So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's that true localization is so much more than translation. It's really this deep process of adaptation, of weaving a product into the cultural, the legal, and the technical fabric of a brand new country. And it really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? The next time you use an app or a website that just feels completely natural to you, maybe take a second to think about all the immense, invisible work that went into making it feel that way.